Welcome back to True Echo, where every story we tell isn't just heard, it's felt. Today's story starts with a broken toy piano in a city park. A crowd mocked the man who sat at it. Until he played. Until everything stopped. And until the world realized, this was no ordinary old man. Now, settle in. Because what began as mockery, is about to become a movement. Get off that toy piano, old man. It's for kids, not washed-up beggars. The words cut through the soft chatter of the city park like a dull blade against skin. Some laughed. Most didn't look up. But one man, old, hunched, wrapped in a brown coat like memory itself, heard them, and said nothing. He just looked at the chipped yellow piano in front of him, a plastic child's instrument more suited for playdates than performance, and sat down. Not out of defiance. Not even grace. But like a man carrying a story too heavy to speak, so he played. He didn't look at the boy who mocked him or the joggers who paused to film what they thought would be a sad viral moment. He didn't look at the mother pushing her stroller or the violinist who paused mid-tune across the path. His fingers hovered above the toy keys, worn, uneven, one leg braced with a library book. Then, sound. Not grand, not rich, but full of something most people couldn't name. Some notes refused to play. Others stuck. But what emerged wasn't music in the traditional sense. It was memory. It was grief. It was love dressed as a lullaby. Within moments, the noise of the park softened. Conversations quieted. Even the boy who had shouted, his smirk dissolved into stillness. The music was hauntingly imperfect. A tune struggling to breathe, yet breathing anyway. The kind of melody that sounds like someone remembering how to feel. The air changed. The ground seemed to hold its breath. A woman stopped mid-step, her coffee spilling as her hands trembled. A businessman ended his call without realizing. A little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter and whispered, "Is he sad, Mommy?" Her mother didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the man at the piano wasn't just playing. He was revealing. And then it ended. Not with applause. Not even with a word. Just silence that pressed itself against everyone like velvet. The man smiled faintly at the piano's cracked edge. Ran a hand over the name a child had once scribbled on it in crayon, Eli. That's when a young voice broke through. "Can you play another one, mister?" The old man turned, his eyes gentle but unreadable. The boy, no older than 7, stepped forward, hands shaking as he held out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this, for my dad. He can't play anymore. He got sick." The man took the paper like it was holy. Looked at the clumsy pencil markings, the title, "For My Dad." And without a word, he nodded. What he played next didn't just move the crowd. It moved the world. The melody was raw, childlike, and fragile, but the way the old man played it made it sacred. He didn't follow the notes exactly. They were simple, barely more than a few measures of hesitant rhythm and awkward spacing. But he treated them with reverence, not correction. He filled in the gaps not to improve them, but to honor them. The boy who had written the song stood completely still, eyes wide, lip trembling. His mother was behind him now, one hand to her mouth, the other resting on his tiny shoulder. And around them, the park breathed as one. This wasn't a performance. It was a translation of something invisible but deeply understood. The music moved gently, like dawn sliding across the surface of a lake. It wasn't perfect, but that was the point. What emerged wasn't just music, it was something deeper. Something people didn't even know they were missing until it was returned. The violinist who had stopped earlier lowered herself into the grass, sitting cross-legged. Her bow lay in her lap. She wasn't needed right now. Her gift, for once, was to listen. More gathered. A circle began to form, but no one dared to speak. A teenager sat on the fountain's edge and wiped his eyes with his sleeve, ashamed that he had laughed. The security guard, who had approached earlier, now lingered behind a tree, cap in hand, watching, not guarding. The old man faltered for just a moment. His hands paused mid-air above the toy keys. His shoulders trembled. The child's title, "For My Dad," still visible on the ledge beside him. That was when it became clear, this wasn't just the boy's story. It was his, too. He played the final verse as if letting go of something he'd held for far too long. And when the last note faded, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Like something had been poured into the air itself. The boy looked up at him and whispered, "That was exactly how I heard it in my head." The man smiled, not a performer's smile, but something quieter. "That's because it was already perfect," he said softly. "I just translated it." Someone in the crowd murmured a name. A name spoken like a legend. Nathaniel Quinn. The old man didn't react. But a woman in the back gasped. She pulled out her phone and searched the name. The photo she found was grainy, black and white, taken years ago, but unmistakable. A younger version of the man on the toy piano, dressed in a tuxedo beside a Steinway, bowed slightly after a performance at Carnegie Hall. The caption beneath it read, "Nathaniel Quinn performs one final time before vanishing." The violinist, Leah Tawes, stared in disbelief. "That's not just anyone," she whispered. "That's the man who built music schools in war zones, sent pianos to refugee camps, then disappeared." The boy with the song still stood beside him. He tugged at the man's coat. "Why did you stop playing?" Nathaniel didn't answer. Not at first. Then he knelt and said, "Because I forgot who I was playing for." That was when a small girl stepped forward. She had Down syndrome, a missing shoelace, and held a plastic daisy with one petal gone. She pressed it into his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for the sunshine." His face, tight for so long, softened. He knelt to her level, eyes misting. "You just gave me some, too." And she hugged him. In that moment, something invisible shattered. The wall around him, whatever pain had made him hide, broke. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They just felt. He stood slowly, kissed the top of the girl's head, and turned to go. But the boy ran after him. "Wait, what's your name?" Nathaniel stopped. Turned. And, for the first time, faced them all. "I'm just someone who believes music is never really lost." And then he disappeared into the crowd, leaving only the daisy, the piano, and a memory that would never fade. The next morning, the park was not the same. The yellow toy piano still sat beneath the elm tree, slightly crooked, still chipped, but it no longer looked like a forgotten piece of plastic. It looked like something sacred. A relic. Parents brought their children to see it. Strangers walked by slowly, heads bowed, unsure why they felt compelled to stop and listen for a melody that had already faded. But it hadn't faded, not really. The boy who had given Nathaniel the music sheet returned with his mother. This time, he didn't bring a new song. He just sat on the bench beside the piano, tracing his finger over the crayon marks another child had left behind. He wasn't crying, but he wasn't smiling either. He just looked like someone trying to hold on to something they weren't ready to lose. That evening, something unexpected happened. The violinist, Leah Tawes, returned. She had once filled the great halls of Vienna with sound. But today, she brought no sheet music, no program. Just her violin, her bow, and the memory of that broken song Nathaniel had made whole. She sat where Nathaniel had sat. Then, with one soft breath, she began to play. It was the boy's melody, now layered with harmonies, drawn from memory, trembling with awe. She didn't overpower the original tune. She weaved around it. Supported it. Let it breathe. Around her, people gathered again. Not tourists. Not critics. Just humans aching to feel something real. As Leia played, others joined in. A cellist who hadn't touched his instrument in 10 years. A teenager with a battered flute. A mother humming softly with a baby pressed to her chest. None of them had practiced together. None of them knew each other. But it didn't matter. Because what was forming wasn't a band. It was a belonging. Even the boy with the sheet music began to tap his hand against the side of the piano, adding rhythm, however clumsy. His mother knelt beside him, eyes glassy. "I think he's smiling," she whispered, and she didn't mean her son. The next day, chalk drawings of piano keys appeared on the sidewalks. Notes. Names. Messages. "You helped me breathe again. Play me. Dad, I miss you." The yellow piano had become something more than an instrument, it had become a mirror. A place where people came to see themselves reflected in sound. And then the video was posted. The teen who had first mocked Nathaniel, the one who had recorded everything but never uploaded it, finally shared the full footage. No edits. No filters. Just a single caption, "I didn't understand it when it happened. But I do now." Within hours, the video exploded. Millions watched as Nathaniel Quinn, long believed gone, played a child's broken piano with a tenderness that made strangers cry. Commenters wrote of their own memories, parents they'd lost, songs they hadn't sung since childhood, things they hadn't let themselves feel in years. And among the thousands of comments, one stood out. "That melody saved me. I was going to end everything last night. But then I heard him play." A whisper of a movement began. People started returning to their own forgotten instruments. Posting their own tiny, imperfect songs. Tagging it all with the phrase, #listeningroom. And still, no one could find Nathaniel. News anchors speculated. Music blogs dug through archives. Old students, board members, and donors all came forward, offering fragments of his past. A billionaire composer. A grieving father. A man who gave it all away and vanished. But no one could answer the only question that mattered. Why now? Why return to a toy piano in a public park after years of silence? No one knew. Not even Leia. Until the fourth day, when the daisy returned. There it was. Sitting atop the piano's yellow keys. Fresh. One pedal missing. And beside it, a laminated note pinned to the bench with a riverstone. The music continues. "Meet me here at sunset. Bring nothing but your heart." NQ. By 5 p.m. that evening, the park was alive in a way it hadn't been in decades. Word had spread. Not through posters or news outlets, but through whispers, shares, reposts, and the growing echo of a single broken melody. Families came with lawn chairs. Teens arrived with Bluetooth speakers and shaky instruments. Elderly couples walked hand in hand toward the yellow piano like they were attending a wedding. And yet, despite the crowd, no one was loud. It wasn't a concert. It was something closer to church. Children drew chalk hearts around the piano. A florist had donated buckets of daisies and sunflowers, most already placed gently around the base of the bench. A local bakery handed out cookies with hand-piped music notes. There were no vendors, no money exchanged. Only gifts. Only gratitude. Leia stood at the center, violin resting at her side, eyes scanning the trees for him. The boy with the music sheet clutched his paper tight to his chest. It was now sealed in a plastic sleeve to protect it from the wind, but he didn't care about the condition. He was just afraid he'd miss him. Miss Nathaniel. As dusk set, string lights flickered on overhead, swaying slightly in the early summer breeze. Still, no Nathaniel. Until the music returned. It wasn't loud. It came like a breeze, soft and tentative. A single guitar chord, played by a man in a torn jacket sitting cross-legged near the piano. Then a flute joined in from across the lawn. Then Leia, lifting her bow, began to play, not a melody, but a harmony. A weaving. Children approached first. Unafraid. One touched a piano key, then another. Then laughter. Then more music. And then, a song. Not rehearsed. Not structured. But alive. A young man sang a wordless tune. A girl clapped in rhythm. A woman swayed with a baby on her hip. Even the security guard from earlier nodded along, his arms crossed but his heart unguarded. And then, a whistle. It was faint, carried on the wind. But unmistakable. Every head turned. There, beneath the old oak, stood Nathaniel Quinn. No spotlight. No entourage. Just him. His coat damp, a daisy still tucked in the breast pocket. He didn't approach the piano. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched, as the world he had quietly reshaped began to reshape itself. He smiled. A small, tired, but true smile. Then he turned to go. Wait. The little boy broke free from his mother's hand and ran forward, the music sheet flapping in the wind. Nathaniel paused. Looked down at him. Said nothing. The boy extended the paper. You can keep it. Nathaniel knelt slowly. Took the page gently. Touched the boy's shoulder. You keep writing. I'll keep listening. And then he disappeared again. Into the shadows. Into the city. But this time, it wasn't goodbye. Because the music stayed. By the following evening, the park wasn't just a gathering place. It had become something else entirely, something sacred. More instruments arrived, each with a story. A woman carried an old upright piano on a dolly with the help of two neighbors. It belonged to my grandmother, she explained. She played it during the war. A teenage boy dragged a second-hand keyboard in a red wagon, duct-taped and dusty. A cello was carried like a newborn in the arms of a silent man who nodded at everyone but said nothing. No one asked for names. No one gave credentials. They just came, and they played. And the music, imperfect, unrehearsed, wove its way through the grass and benches like a living memory. It was healing. Not flashy. Not grand. But deep. Children began taking turns on the yellow toy piano again. Not performing, but exploring, like they understood something the adults had forgotten, that music didn't need to be impressive to be important. Leia watched it unfold with a sense of wonder that filled her chest and made her arms tremble every time she picked up her bow. There was no plan. No sheet music. But there was connection. And in that, a kind of order emerged. But not everyone celebrated what was happening. On the fourth night, just as the golden hour painted long shadows across the grass, a black SUV rolled up and parked at the edge of the crowd. The windows were tinted. Its engine idled too long. Then two men stepped out, suits, lanyards, leather folders in hand. The kind of men who had never sat on grass in their lives. They didn't smile. They didn't clap. They just watched. Leia saw them from the fountain and felt her stomach twist. One of them stepped forward. I need to speak with Nathaniel Quinn. Silence. When will he be here? No one replied. I'm Everett Pike, the man continued. General Counsel for the Solace Foundation. Mr. Quinn's reappearance in public has triggered legal complications. He is still bound to contractual and fiduciary responsibilities that. You're in the wrong place, someone muttered from the crowd. Everett didn't flinch. The world is watching this. Investors. International partners. Donors. His actions here, however inspiring, have consequences. A murmur rustled through the crowd. The boy with the music sheet stepped closer to his mother. Someone placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Leia stepped forward. Consequences? She asked. Her voice steady, but sharp. For playing a child's melody on a broken piano? He walked away from obligations, Everett said, his voice silk and ice. From $1 billion foundation. He walked toward people, Leia shot back. Toward purpose. You came here with contracts. He came here with compassion. Which one do you think we needed more? The second man, younger, more hesitant, finally spoke. My daughter came here, 3 nights ago, he said. She hasn't spoken since her accident. But that night, she played a single note. First time in 2 years. He turned toward the crowd. She played because of him. A silence settled again, not the tense kind, but the kind that softened spines and cracked open hearts. Everett glanced sideways at his colleague, then back to the piano. He doesn't need your defense, he muttered. No, Leia said. He doesn't. But we do. And that was when Nathaniel stepped out from the shadows. He hadn't come from behind a stage or down a main path. He just appeared, coat unbuttoned, hair windblown, face calm. I'm not here to argue, he said, his voice low and warm. And I'm not here to reclaim anything. I'm here to listen. Everett stared at him, tense. You've been served. He lifted the folder, but Nathaniel didn't flinch. I won't run, Nathaniel said. I won't pretend either. He turned toward the people. Toward the children sitting cross-legged on the grass. Toward the girl with Down syndrome clutching her daisy. Toward the boy who had written, for my dad. I built empires with my hands, he said, but I never stopped long enough to hold my son when it mattered most. A sharp inhale rippled across the field. I made music for power. For praise. For prestige. But my son, he made music for joy. When he died, I didn't know how to live in the silence he left behind. So I disappeared. He paused, eyes glistening. And then I heard a child's melody. The boy stepped forward, small, brave. Do you think he heard you? Nathaniel knelt. Pressed a hand to the boy's chest. I don't just think. I know. Because I heard you. The men in suits didn't speak. They couldn't. Because no legal document could silence what had just been said. Nathaniel turned back toward the little piano. He didn't play. He just sat. Among them. Beside them. And the crowd began to breathe again. The days that followed blurred together like brushstrokes across a rain-soaked canvas. The movement that had begun with one man at a broken toy piano had transformed into something much larger. Every evening, the park filled, not for a show, but for something sacred. People brought more than instruments now. They brought journals, drawings, photos of lost loved ones, whispers of grief, and prayers in the form of song. And Nathaniel? He didn't lead. He never took the stage. He simply showed up when it mattered, and left quietly, leaving behind a flower or a note, sometimes just the echo of a melody no one had ever heard before. They called it the listening room. Not a building. Not a brand. A space. A way of being. A shared agreement, that here, your voice mattered, even if it was cracked, quiet, or incomplete. But the world beyond the park was watching. A drone flew overhead one evening, recording as children played chopsticks on the old upright and Leia's bow traced harmonies through twilight. The video streamed online. The footage went viral. And soon, the world tried to name what they had no right to claim. Headlines exploded. The disappeared maestro returns in park performance that moves millions. From billionaire to street musician, the untold story of Nathaniel Quinn. He gave us permission to feel, listening room movement sweeps the nation. But for the people in the park, none of those headlines mattered. What mattered was that someone had brought a child's melody to life, and now it was everyone's. On the 7th night, the sky bruised purple and gold. The boy who had started it all returned again, a little taller in posture, his music sheet tucked carefully in his coat. He stood by the piano with Leia, watching a girl with red rain boots and a stuffed lion tap out a note, then two. No rhythm. No melody. Just curiosity. Just trust. Soon, other children joined her. A boy with a green backpack sat beside her and plunked a tune with awkward fingers. Another followed. Then a fourth. It wasn't beautiful. It was better, it was honest. A man with a guitar knelt beside them, strumming a gentle chord underneath their chaos. The violinist joined again, not to lead, but to blend, to weave. And slowly, from the mess, a melody formed. Not a song, but a feeling. That's when the girl with Down syndrome returned. The daisy Nathaniel had once held was now pressed between pages in her notebook. She didn't speak. She just laid her small hand on the keys and let her fingers rest there. Then, without any announcement, without fanfare, he was back. Nathaniel. He came from the shadows once more. No coat this time. Just him. Just presence. And in his hand was a piano key, gold-plated, worn smooth from decades of use. He walked to the little boy who'd written the original song. This was from the piano my son first learned on, Nathaniel said, his voice softer than the breeze. Now, it's yours. The boy stared, breath caught. His mother sobbed quietly behind him. You start the next one, Nathaniel whispered. And then, he was gone again. But something had shifted. Leia turned to the boy. What do you want to do with it? He looked up. His voice was small, but clear, build something. That's how the listening room, chapter 2 began. Not with a board meeting. Not with signatures. But with shared silence and a child's voice. Meline Grayson, the woman who once taught Nathaniel, returned days later with a folder of blueprints and sketches. A school, she said, but not the kind we knew. A safe one. One that listens. There were no mirrors in the practice rooms. No grades. No auditions. Just open space. Circular walls. Gardens between classrooms. Small instruments for small hands. Old ones for old souls. Leia nodded. And so they built. The city gave permission. The mayor reallocated funds from a development project and protected the park under a new ordinance. Art without ego is what this city has always needed, she said quietly at the announcement. The first brick wasn't laid with cement. It was laid with music. A child pressing 3 keys. A woman bowing a single note. A community singing in imperfect harmony beneath string lights and falling rain. Nathaniel wasn't there when they raised the beams. But everyone felt him. In the daisy beside the steps. In the chalk scrawled on the sidewalk, play if you feel something. In the silence that fell not from absence, but from reverence. And that night, as the sun dipped low and the stars blinked to life, Leia sat beneath the elm with her violin and whispered into the dusk. He didn't save music. He gave it back to us. On the 10th evening, just as the last candle burned low and the hush of dusk blanketed the park, he returned. No announcement. No procession. Just Nathaniel Quinn stepping from the shadows like a memory reawakened. He wore no coat this time, no daisy in his pocket. Just a faded linen shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, as if he'd walked out of a dream and into the center of everything he had helped create. The crowd noticed in waves, first a child, then a teen, then Leia, who nearly dropped her violin. Nathaniel walked toward the yellow piano, now polished and varnished, its chipped edges lovingly preserved, its legs reinforced with steel, but still simple. Still small. Still the heartbeat of the movement. He didn't sit. Not at first. He stood in front of it, tracing its edge with his fingers, pausing to feel the initials carved in its side by children who had made it their own. Then he turned to the crowd, now stretching far beyond the park gates, spilling into sidewalks and trees and rooftop balconies. And then, he did something he'd never done before. He sang. No microphone. No prelude. Just his voice, fragile, untrained, cracking in places but pure. A lullaby. Simple. Intimate. It had no fame, no name. But to Nathaniel, it was everything. It was the melody his son once hummed while building Legos at the kitchen table. A fragment of family. A sound never meant for the stage, only for love. Tears shimmered in the eyes of strangers. Then, without a word, he sat at the piano. And he played. It was not a performance. It was a release. A final medley, made of memories. The boys' lullaby. Sonata for silence. The girls' improvised melody from the hospital. Leia's harmony from that first night. Even the stuttering notes from the Daisy Giver's small, clumsy hands. Each piece wove into the next, not as medleys, but as moments. He wasn't just playing a song. He was handing it over. Piece by piece. Gently. Reverently. The crowd stood in silence. No phones raised. No one moved. As the final note stretched into the air, his fingers hovering above the keys, he didn't let the silence break. He just held it. Let it settle like morning mist on grass. And then, he stood. No bow. No farewell. He stepped down and walked through the crowd, slowly, memorizing faces, squeezing shoulders, nodding at children, offering nothing more than presence. When he reached the boy who started it all, he knelt. From his pocket, Nathaniel pulled the final piece of himself, a single gold-plated piano key. This, he said, was from the grand piano in my childhood home. The one my mother gave me. It's yours now. The boy accepted it with both hands, like receiving fire from a dying star. You start the next one, Nathaniel whispered. Then he rose and walked away, into the crowd, into the trees, into the hush that follows fulfillment. No one chased him. No one had to. Because he hadn't left. He had planted. In the days that followed, the piano was moved into a weatherproof glass shelter at the center of the park. Not behind velvet ropes. Not in a museum. Still open. Still playable. And above it, carved into the wood. Listen. Then play. There was no plaque. No grand dedication. Just an invitation. The listening room grew. A little girl in Michigan played her first song on a bench outside a bus stop. A retired man in Tokyo tuned an alleyway upright and played for his neighbors. A mother in Cape Town recorded her son tapping on plastic buckets and uploaded the video with the hashtag listening room. None of them claimed ownership. All of them knew what it meant. Because Nathaniel Quinn hadn't returned for glory. He had returned to remind the world of something it had almost forgotten. That silence is not empty. That broken things can still sing. And that sometimes, the most beautiful music begins with just one trembling key. Nathaniel Quinn didn't come back to reclaim his fame. He came to restore something deeper, something sacred. He showed us that legacy isn't built in concert halls or on magazine covers. It's built in the quiet corners of community. In a child's melody. In a moment of courage. In choosing presence over performance. As he once said, you don't need applause to know something matters. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share your voice. Start your melody. And remember. Sometimes, the most powerful revolutions begin with the softest notes. Subscribe to True Echo for more stories that restore your faith in humanity. Leave us a comment, what part of this story stayed with you? And share this video with someone who needs to remember that they are heard.